So Caitlin Clark's injury is something that is going to massively affect the WNBA. It's going to massively affect the league.
The WNBA was rocked by Caitlin Clark's injury, and it's not just about missing games. Players all over the league are reportedly terrified that their upcoming contract negotiations could cost them millions of dollars. The timing couldn't be worse, and the financial ramifications are absolutely staggering. This could completely alter the landscape of women's basketball salaries. How much do you believe the injury to Caitlin Clark will affect the WNBA's upcoming collective bargaining agreement? Here are your predictions.
Obviously, look, there's going to be financial impact in the teams for 2 weeks, but the long-term financial impact of this injury might actually be scary.
Allow me to explain why Caitlin Clark's quad injury is causing WNBA players to miss sleep. The timing of this injury couldn't be worse for players who are counting on huge wage rises. It's not just about missing a few games. It's about perhaps losing millions of dollars in contract discussions that are quickly approaching. This is the circumstance that has everyone in a frenzy. In a normal league, losing a player for 2 weeks wouldn't be disastrous, but the WNBA isn't a normal league, and Caitlin Clark isn't a normal player. She's essentially the league's entire financial engine, and everyone knows it. Clark suffered a quad strain that will keep her out for about 2 weeks. The Washington Mystics' upcoming game against the Indiana Fever was initially planned for a smaller venue, but like every other team in the league, they moved it to a larger arena because they knew Caitlin Clark would sell out. They also spent money on marketing and hiring more staff because they anticipated large crowds. This was the first significant issue that arose right away.
Plus, or one of these visiting cities paying all this money, paying up for tickets, and at the end of the day, deciding to not go, all right? Calling the whole trip off.
You can guess what occurred after Caitlin Clark stopped playing. Lionel Messi play for Inter Miami. Fans go crazy and demand refunds, compensation, or anything else to make up for the fact that they paid premium prices to see the one player who actually matters. Overnight, ticket prices were cut in half, leaving entire sections of the arena empty with zero sales. People bought tickets to see WNBA when Messi doesn't play. MLB teams have begun to provide complimentary tickets to upcoming games, free food, and other benefits because they understand that fans feel betrayed, but here's the important distinction. MLS freely admits that Messi is more popular than their league. They don't act as though football was developing in America on its own. Instead, they understand that Messi is the attraction and have built their economic strategy around that fact. However, the WNBA has been completely unaware of Caitlin Clark's influence.
Split instance, all of it can change. If this injury does anything, it should be a wake-up call to the WNBA, the Players Association, the team owners, that just like that, all this fanfare, all this interest, all this newfound attention on the league can disappear.
Over the past 2 years, UNBA executives have worked to persuade everyone that the league's expansion is natural and sustainable. They have promoted stories about how women's basketball is finally receiving the recognition it merits, how all players are helping to fuel this growth, and how the league has made financial progress. But Caitlin Clark's injury is set to reveal all of that as total bullshit. Without Caitlin Clark on the court, the next 2 weeks will be a harsh reality check for everyone involved. Based on historical data, we'll see exactly what WNBA attendance and ratings look like when she's not playing, and those numbers will be appalling. We're talking about games that might not even draw 200,000 television viewers, which leads us to the true fear among WNBA players. Players have been getting ready to demand significant pay rises in the next collective bargaining agreement negotiations. Better housing allowances, child care assistance, and charter flights, expanded rosters, and an extensive list of pricey benefits. They intend to use the league's recent expansion as an excuse for these demands. But what will happen if team owners can use the next 2 weeks as evidence that, look, without Caitlin Clark, nobody watches our games, and our attendance drops by 80%? Our entire business model hinges on a single player who could get hurt at any time. So how are we meant to pay you millions of dollars when our television ratings are dropping so precipitously? Players are currently in a panic because of that nightmare scenario. They were counting on leverage in these negotiations, believing they could use record television ratings, sold-out arenas, and increased merchandise sales as evidence that they should receive huge pay raises. However, if the next 2 weeks show that Caitlin Clark is solely responsible for all of that success, their influence totally vanishes. Let's be brutally honest about what the viewership data will reveal. Caitlin Clark's regular games draw 1.5 to 2 million viewers. When she doesn't play, the numbers drop to maybe 400,000 viewers on a good day. That's not sustainable growth. That's one player carrying an entire league on her back. The attendance numbers are even more damning. Arenas that can accommodate 17,000 people are selling out for the Indiana Fever games. When Caitlin Clark visits opposing cities, ticket prices triple and arenas that typically have empty sections suddenly fill up. When you take her out of the equation, you're back to embarrassingly low attendance figures, which causes a huge problem for players who are hoping to negotiate from a position of strength. Other WNBA games struggle to fill venues with 8,000 seats. When your league relies solely on one individual, how can you expect million-dollar salaries? How do you defend luxury lodging and charter flights when eliminating one player reduces your revenue by 70%? According to Smart Money, team owners are secretly hoping that these 2 weeks go poorly in terms of attendance and ratings because they want hard evidence that Caitlin Clark is the sole driver of the league's recent success. This will give them the leverage they need to keep salaries low and benefits minimal during contract negotiations. If you're a team owner and you know that your entire revenue stream depends on one player who could get hurt, retire, or leave at any time, are you going to commit to paying all players like superstars? No, you're going to protect your investment and keep costs as low as possible until you can develop other revenue streams. The other major issue is sustainability. Even if WNBA players get the salary increases they want, what happens when Caitlin Clark eventually retires? What happens if she suffers a career-ending injury? The entire financial structure of the league would collapse and teams would be stuck paying inflated salaries they can't afford. This is why some analysts are suggesting that WNBA players should actually be hoping for Caitlin Clark to stay healthy and productive for as long as possible. Her success is directly tied to their financial future. If she flames out, gets injured repeatedly, or decides to play overseas, everyone else's earning potential goes down the drain. But here's where it gets really interesting from a negotiation standpoint. Players could argue that they deserve higher salaries precisely because the league is so dependent on one player. They could say that the risk of losing Caitlin Clark makes it even more important to invest in other players and build additional stars, but that's a risky argument because it admits that the current growth isn't sustainable. The reality is that the WNBA has very few legitimate draws beyond Caitlin Clark. Paige Bueckers has some popularity, but she pulls in maybe half the viewership that Caitlin Clark generates. Angel players like A.A. Wilson, Brianna Stewart, and Sabrina are talented, but they don't make a difference in terms of television ratings or ticket sales. Reese is more of a celebrity than a basketball star. People are more interested in her drama and social media presence than in her on-court performance. The Seattle Storm, Las Vegas Aces, and New York Liberty may all have fantastic seasons, but without Caitlin Clark, they aren't packing stadiums or drawing sizable television audiences. This lack of star power gives team owners even more negotiating leverage in contract negotiations because they can argue that since the majority of players don't make a substantial contribution to the league's revenue growth, they shouldn't receive huge salary increases. Although it's brutal, professional sports commercial realities, players were hoping to use this season's success as their main justification for higher compensation. But if the next 2 weeks show that the success was entirely dependent on one player, that argument completely collapses. In addition, there is the psychological impact to take into account. This injury's timing is especially cruel because it occurs just before the most significant contract negotiations in WNBA history. WNBA players have been celebrating the league's recent success and feeling like they're finally receiving the respect and recognition they deserve. But it's a sobering reminder that things can go wrong quickly when one player is hurt and that their negotiating power may not be as great as they initially believed. Players must also take into account the WNBA team's financial realities. From a strategic standpoint, this injury may actually help team owners in the long run because it gives them tangible data to use in negotiations and forces everyone to face the uncomfortable truth about the league's financial structure. They can argue that until the WNBA develops multiple legitimate stars, they can't afford to pay players like they're all superstars. Most franchises have been losing money for years and have only recently begun to see some profitability thanks to increased interest. But if that interest is entirely dependent on Caitlin Clark, team owners will be very cautious about making long-term financial commitments. The future of WNBA pay will be decided in the next 2 weeks, and if games without Caitlin Clark draw respectable attendance and ratings, players may still have some negotiating leverage. However, if the numbers plummet, as most people anticipate, players will be in a very weak position when contract negotiations start. What complicates matters further is that Caitlin Clark's rookie contract pays her a fraction of what male athletes with comparable impact earn, but because of the salary structure, other players have been profiting from her fame without necessarily helping to create it. This creates an intriguing dynamic where Caitlin Clark's injury could actually hurt other players' earning potential more than it hurts her own. She is already committed to her contract, but other players were depending on the league's expansion to support their salary demands, and if that growth is sustainable, their negotiating position becomes much weaker. The larger question this raises is whether the WNBA can ever become a truly stable multi-star league, or if it will always rely on one transcendent player to carry the entire operation. At the moment, it appears to be the latter, which makes long-term financial planning extremely difficult for both players and team owners. For WNBA players, this injury is their worst nightmare coming true at the worst possible time, as they were so close to potentially securing life-changing contracts, and now they are facing the possibility that their leverage has completely evaporated. Over the next 2 weeks, it will be determined whether they are negotiating from a position of strength or weakness, and early indications indicate it will be the latter. Players who were hoping for millions in their next contracts may have to settle for considerably less, and the next 2 weeks will define the financial future of women's basketball. Caitlin Clark's injury just revealed the WNBA's worst weakness at the worst possible time. For more WNBA financial breakdowns, click the like button and subscribe. What do you think will happen next?